Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Karen Hold. She's the founder of Experience Lab, and her work is grounded in a core belief that design thinking provides an enabling social technology, that's interesting, that facilitates adaptation and effective problem solving in complex solutions. Without getting into her long bio, she's also the author of the recently published Experiencing Designs, which she's a co-author of, that came out by Columbia Business School Press not all that long ago. And I suggest you grab a copy of that if you can. So welcome, Karen. Let's just sort of dive in.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here, Peter.
So before we dive into the content, to the thought leadership, let's talk about your journey, because that's always fascinating to me. So I would imagine that, young Karen as a 7-year-old wasn't dreaming and aspiring of becoming an experienced design author, amongst other things, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, no, I grew up in just outside Washington, D.C., and my dad was a lawyer. So I went to Duke, a little bit further south here, great basketball team. To study public policy because I thought I would come back to DC, and my world in DC was all around politics and policy. And that's what I did. I came back, I joined a political action committee, and I was running a political action committee as a manager. And the pace of change was so slow. It was like watching paint dry. I thought that I couldn't imagine myself having a long professional career in this world. So I made a pivot and I went to business school, and I read Tom Peters' book.
Oh, there's not Search of Excellence?
In Search of Excellence. Gosh, why? It's like a pivotal change for me. In Search of Excellence in 1984, when I was a junior in college, and it changed my mindset.
Yeah.
But I was still on this trajectory to move back to Washington, right? So, but I pivoted and I went to business school, and I landed at P&G, Procter & Gamble, which is one of the companies that Tom wrote about.
Yep.
And that was my dream job. And I had this profound experience when I was there that took me about 20 years to figure out what happened. I was working on the Folgers coffee brand. And it was about the time that Starbucks was starting to emerge as a player. They had a $165 million business in the Pacific Northwest, and we were close to $1 billion brand. And
wait, so stay there for a minute to give people a historical context that Folgers was a $1 billion brand, and Starbucks was this little nothing nipping at their heels.
Mostly centered in the Pacific Northwest, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, as a Starbucks addict, I think that history lesson alone is worthy. And thankfully, I can say I don't think I've had a cup of Folgers in 25 years. So,
so here's the thing. When I was working at Folgers, we went down to this plant in New Orleans. It was our beautiful plant. And I brought home a vacuum packed bag for my husband, and he thought it was the best coffee that he'd ever had. And the reason is because at that time, Folgers had the primary relationships with the farmers, and Maxwell House too, right? So they had the first pick of beans. And so what we did was we put those beautiful beans, roasted them, vacuum packed them in a can, put them in a distribution center that may, end up on a warehouse shelf for 2 years before it actually ended up in your home. So by the time you're drinking it, the flavor profile is long gone, right?
Right.
Starbucks, meanwhile, was having to take our picked over beans at the port that we didn't buy, and they were wrapping around this experience. And people were willing to pay for that, right? So they were able.
Well, they also weren't letting it sit on a shelf for 2 years.
They weren't letting it sit.
Which was a unique sort of American experience at that time, because we were drinking warm dishwater.
Yeah. But so I brought this fresh coffee home from the plant, and he thought it was the best coffee. And he's a coffee aficionado, and he thought it was the best coffee that he'd ever tasted. Anyhow, so what happened was we had these the young members of the team thought that there was something to this Starbucks experience because we'd experienced this in graduate school and in college. And we thought there's a there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go out and let's look at what they're doing, and let's see if we can respond, or should we be meeting them in the market. So we sent a big team out to Seattle, and they drove around to a lot of different coffee shops. They came back to our headquarters in Cincinnati and decided not to do anything. And the reason is that we relied on Nielsen syndicated data to make all our decisions. And Nielsen measures club store sales, grocery store sales, mass merch, convenience stores, and Starbucks wasn't being sold through any of those distribution channels. So
they didn't exist. Right.
As far as we could see, Starbucks didn't exist, right? So we said, it's not a threat. We're not making a change to our future plans. We're not thinking about this as a threat in the market. And so we just let them go on their merry way. Meanwhile, the customer is paying for this new value that Starbucks is creating. And fast forward 30 years, right? They have a $24 billion in sales. Folgers has, I don't know, $2 billion in sales last time I checked. Starbucks creates 12 times the economic impact that Folgers does. And we could have
but more importantly, I think, and this I think is one of the key points, they created a new category. And I think when we look at that today, lots of businesses that are killing it have created a new category, right? So, if you look at Amazon, you look at Google, you look at, whatever, to beat a competitor, the old Coke and Pepsi mindset, classic business school models and, competitive advantage and all that work. When someone's coming in out of nowhere, like a Tesla, do they compete with Ford? Well, now Ford competes with them, right?
Yeah.
So
that's right. Yeah. It took me a long time to figure out, though, like if we had been a company that had valued experimentation and placed small bets at the time. P&G is absolutely that company now. But back when I was there 30 years ago, they weren't willing to run those experiments or to place those small bets. And so we missed out on a big opportunity. 2 years ago.
But by the way, that's fairly typical. I mean, that's no different than, Blockbuster laughing at Netflix. By the way, if you're under 35, Google Blockbuster, right? Like
well, 2 years ago, I was working on a project and met a Maxwell House executive who was at Maxwell House the same time I was at Folgers. And I said, what were you doing when this all happened?
Right.
He said, Karen, we were doing the same thing you were doing, right?
Of course.
We were using Nielsen syndicated data. He said, our team was in Paris for an event and Starbucks was opening a retail shop on the Champs-Élysées. And he said, we knew it was game over. The train had left the station. We had missed it because when somebody like Starbucks can open a retail shop on the most expensive retail space in the world, their margins.
There's a there,
high, right? Right. And the train had left the station.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
So let's go back to your journey as a thought leader. So how do you go from Folgers to published author, founder of an experience design organization? How does that all happen? Because that seems like a different chapter in the book of Karen, if you will.
Yeah, well, I married into a family of designers. And I learned by osmosis by marrying into this family. My husband's grandfather was very successful and revolutionized naval aviation. And so I learned how he used the tools of designers to really make change in his industry, make change, because I grew up in a family, like I said, of lawyers. And my dad used an auditory language to communicate and to move problems forward. And in my husband
and build in 6-minute increments, probably.
Yeah.
Right? sorry to my lawyer friends, but yeah, we've been on the receiving end of those bills. So anyway.
But I married into this family where his grandfather used a visual language to solve problems and move forward. And he turned abstract thought into concrete ideas and visualized his ideas. So, for instance, the Secretary of the Navy came to him and asked him to figure out how to double the number of aircraft on aircraft carriers during World War II. And most naval aviators at the time were thinking that they needed to fold the wings of the plane up because all airplanes had fixed wings at that
Wingspan.
point.
Yeah.
And so if you could fold the wings up, then you could be able to get the space efficiency that you needed.
Yep.
But most of the wings snapped, right? A lot of naval aviators went into the Pacific and the Atlantic because those wings snapped when they did that. And grandpa,
so snapping wings are bad. That's really
snapping wings equals bad. Yes.
Right. Okay.
But what grandpa was able to figure out, and it wasn't because he was brilliant, but this was, he was taking in information and he tinkered with those ideas. So the story goes that, he was sitting around this big conference table. He was at the head of the table as the CEO of the company, but all of his engineers are around the table and they're all talking about this problem, trying to figure out how are we going to fold these wings up? How are we going to double the number of aircraft on the aircraft carrier? And so he's receiving this information, but rather than using his words to communicate back, he is tinkering. And so he was tinkering at the end of the table with an eraser and 2 paper clips. And when the conversation came to him, he was able to put this simple eraser and 2 paper clips on the table and show that what the problem was the problem of a pivot. And if you could fold the wing back like the wing of a bird, you could maintain stability in the wing and achieve the folding mechanism that you needed for it. And it wasn't through talk and auditory communication that they figured that out. He was tinkering and visualizing his ideas. So they took that simple eraser and 2 paper clips to the model maker at the firm, and he made a proper model. They put that on the table for the Secretary of the Navy, and he was instantly able to see the value of this idea. But it was through this visualization, this prototyping.
Right. So I could imagine another way to communicate that. Another way to communicate that might have been an 88-page technical report with blueprints and diagrams and whatever, where that might have worked for some, but not for most. And I think what happens is in my world, in the world of thought leadership, I call it sort of the default creation mode fallacy, which is, hey, if you're a writer, you love to write, therefore everyone else must be like you, because how could they not be, right? If you are someone that would rather get your ideas out via video, right? Well, clearly everyone listens to, watches video, audio, drawings, whatever. And I think actually the right approach is being aware of, hey, my default is X. I'd rather speak than write. I'm a mediocre writer on my best day, and I don't have a lot of best days. I'm fairly okay as a communicator verbally, right? But what matters more is, what does Karen want, right? So if you're a more technical person and I'm blabbing away, she's going to go, oh my God, this guy's driving me nuts. He's giving me a headache. There's no data. There's no information. I need something to hold in my hand and read. So I think knowing when to sort of get out of your own way in that way as a thought leader is important.
Well, and I think what I love about this visualization is that science tells us your brain is actually optimized. I'm going to get very nerdy. Like, your brain is actually optimized to make more meaning when you can see something than when you hear it. So 75% of the neurons in your brain that are devoted to your sensory processing, so taste, touch, smell, sight, 75% of those neurons are devoted to your visual senses. So your brain is literally wired to make meaning with visual imagery than it is to make meaning.
Well, but that's a biological thing. Think about being on the tundra there weren't a lot of magazine stands, right? You were scanning the planes to say, is that a tiger or a lion? Is that lunch or is it fight
Yeah.
or flight, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it makes sense that that's our wiring, right?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what humans evolve into in the post-streaming Netflix, whatever, but it probably supports that, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to, yeah, really, really
Yeah.
interesting. So this has been fun. And now, is this your first book?
This is my first book. It's my co-author, Jean Litka's 6th or 7th book.
So we've got we've only got a couple of minutes left, but two things that I find interesting there in the short period of time we have. Most publishers don't like when they're co-authors, and almost all publishers hate when there's more than two. Right? Like, yeah, because there's so many. There's lots of reasons for that. So,
Yeah.
how was your experience? Was part of a triad, if you will. What was that like as a new author?
Amazing. Getting the opportunity to walk alongside Jean Litka, who is, I think, brilliant. I tell people it's like working with an Olympic athlete who is at the top of their game. She's always pushing new boundaries. She's always looking for new research. She's never satisfied with the knowledge that she has and is curious and hungry for more. And that to me is very appealing. In my private life, I spend a lot of time with Olympic athletes. And so that comparison, those parallel qualities are very attractive to me. And she just has this insatiable hunger for knowledge. And so, and I
love
do
that.
too. And so,
well, I was going to say, and what you're not saying, because it wasn't your experience, a lot of first-time authors struggle with, I'm all alone out here on an island. I don't have anywhere to, I can talk to my agent, I can talk to a publisher, whatever.
yeah.
But ultimately, here I am staring at a screen and, how do I do that?
Oh, no, it was amazing. And Jessica too. Jessica's brilliant as well. And getting to have a triad where you are constantly bouncing ideas off each other was such a high for me. It was actually,
that's awesome.
It was hard for me to come down when the writing process was over because I really craved that. And a lot of our writing happened during the pandemic. So
sure,
we were keeping ourselves really busy, which meant we were doing even more work. So it was an amazing experience. It was just an absolutely amazing experience. And we're continuing to do new research because we added a personal development plan to the book at the 11th hour. We had a publishing deadline.
Okay.
We had to get our manuscript in, but we didn't feel like we had finished that piece of the story yet. And so we spent the next year building a digital tool with our partners in London, Treehouse Innovation, which we just launched a month ago, which provides assessment for anyone to assess their innovation mindset readiness so that see where the places in the innovation journey are that you need to grow the most and where your strengths are. So
that's fantastic. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And thanks again for sending me the book. I can't wait to take a look at it. And this has been fantastic. Thanks, Karen.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.